I'll play my trombone in lieu. No, I won't. I shall play it in here.
The man who became Britain's most beloved comedian was turned away from the BBC's own talent show as a teenager, and the newspaper critic who declared his television debut dead on arrival had no idea he was writing the review that Eric Morecambe would carry in his wallet for the rest of his life. Behind the warmth and the sunshine of Britain's greatest double act lies a story full of close calls, unexpected betrayals, and one Christmas night that half the country watched together. Fact 1. The review he kept. When Morecambe Wise made their television debut in 1954, the BBC gave them their own show. It was called Running Wild, and it was a disaster. Kenneth Bailey, writing for The People, responded with a line that has never been forgotten. Definition of the week: TV set the box in which they buried Morecambe Wise. Eric Morecambe cut that review out and kept it. He carried it with him for the rest of his life, not as a wound, but as a reminder. From that point forward, he and Ernie Wise took absolute control over their material. No one else chose what they performed. No one else decided what went out. The humiliation had produced an ironclad rule. The BBC, for its part, had buried them on screen and would not see them again for 14 years. When they finally returned, in 1968, they did so as the biggest stars in British television. The corporation that had written them off would eventually build its Christmas schedules around them for a decade. The review Bailey wrote took, perhaps, 5 minutes to compose. The career it was intended to end ran for another 30 years, produced some of the most watched television in British history, and inspired a generation of comedians who grew up wanting to be exactly what Morecambe Wise became. Fact 2. The nephew who changed everything. In 1968, Morecambe Wise were coming to the end of their contract with ATV, the commercial television network run by impresario Lou Grade. Grade wanted them back. He offered them £39,000 over 3 years for 3 series of 13 episodes each. The duo had one condition Grade could not meet. They wanted to broadcast in colour. ITV was still transmitting in black and white. Only BBC Two had begun colour broadcasts, and that was where Morecambe Wise decided they needed to be. The negotiation that followed had an unusual structure. Their agent at the time was Michael Grade, who happened to be Lou Grade's own nephew. Michael went over his uncle's head, called the BBC's Bill Cotton directly, and secured a deal that gave Morecambe and Wise more money than ATV had offered and the colour production they needed. Lou Grade had built ATV into one of the most powerful forces in British entertainment. He lost his biggest stars to the rival network because his nephew made a phone call to the competition. The colour television that seemed like a technical preference turned out to be the decision that produced the most celebrated decade in British light entertainment history. Fact 3. The writer from a market stall.
Nice, that.
Just right for this sort of day.
Very nice.
Perfect.
What is it?
Delius.
Who wrote it?
After their BBC debut in 1968, Eric Morecambe suffered a major heart attack at the age of 42. While he was recovering, their writers Dick Hills and Sid Green quietly decided they were done. Ernie Wise was on a flight to Barbados when a cabin crew member told him the news. The act that had no television writer and a lead performer in hospital looked finished. Bill Cotton at the BBC suggested they meet Eddie Braben, a man who had been writing jokes in his spare time while working on a fruit and vegetable market stall in Liverpool, and who had spent 12 years writing material for Ken Dodd. Braben was shy, unconventional, and had never worked with Morecambe Wise before. What Braben did was not just write jokes, he reinvented the characters entirely. He gave Eric and Ernie a shared flat, a shared bed, and domestic habits that turned them from a double act into something closer to a sitcom couple. Ernie became a pompous would-be playwright. Eric became the knowing fool who saw through him. The dynamic that audiences loved for the next 15 years was Braben's invention, not theirs. Together, Morecambe, Wise and Braben became known as the Golden Triangle. Braben won the Writers Guild Best British Light Entertainment Script Award 4 times. The man who had started selling jokes for 2 shillings and sixpence to comedians appearing in Liverpool transformed the most beloved double act in British television history and did it from a standing start, after everyone had assumed the act was over. Fact 4. The dance from Groucho Marx. At the end of every Morecambe and Wise show, the 2 men danced. It was one of the most familiar images in British television, a skipping, loose-limbed routine performed to Bring Me Sunshine that seemed entirely natural, entirely theirs. It was actually a producer's accident. John Ammons, the BBC producer who oversaw the show from 1968, was trying to demonstrate a movement based on Groucho Marx's famous loping walk. His attempt at it came out wrong, looser, bouncier, more joyful than anything Marx had done. Morecambe and Wise watched Ammons' mistake and immediately recognized it. That was the dance. The routine that became synonymous with warmth, with the end of an evening, with a particular quality of shared pleasure in British life, began as a producer getting Groucho Marx slightly wrong in a television studio. Eric's heart condition eventually meant he could no longer dance the full routine. The solution was characteristic. While Ernie danced, Eric would walk to the side of the stage with his coat and bag, as if waiting for a bus. The adjustment made something already beloved even more endearing. The bus stop became as recognizable as the dance itself. Fact 5. The sketch that outlasted the broadcast. In the 1976 Christmas special, Angela Rippon appeared to interrupt the show with a news bulletin. She sat at her desk as usual, composed and authoritative, and began to read. Then the desk split in 2, and Rippon stepped forward and danced. Rippon was, at the time, one of the most recognizable faces in British television, the BBC's first female newsreader, in a regular national role associated entirely with gravitas and seriousness. The idea that she might have legs, let alone use them in a high-kicking routine on a comedy show, was so genuinely surprising that the broadcast caused a national sensation. The following year, the 1977 Christmas special went further. Almost every major BBC newsreader of the era appeared together in a production number. The sketch began a tradition that has never entirely ended. Newsreaders and journalists appearing in comic formats at Christmas, breaking the fourth wall of their own authority. The 1976 special was where it started. Rippon later said she had been terrified. The audience had no idea what was coming. The moment the desk split, the laughter in the studio was, by all accounts, the loudest response to anything Morecambe and Wise had ever produced. If you're enjoying this, it would mean a lot if you subscribed. It helps us keep making videos like this one. Just hit that button and you'll never miss a new one. Fact 6. The Christmas that half the country watched. On Christmas Day 1977, Morecambe and Wise broadcast their final show for the BBC. The audience was somewhere between 21 and 28 million people, figures that have been contested and revised over the decades, but which by any measure represented a substantial portion of the entire British population watching the same programme at the same moment. The show had a cast that included the stars of Dad's Army and The Good Life, newsreaders from across the BBC, Angela Rippon again, and Elton John. It was also, though no one in the audience knew it, the last Christmas special the duo would make for the corporation that had been their home for a decade. 5 weeks later, the press reported that Morecambe and Wise had signed with Thames Television. The BBC had broadcast the most watched entertainment programme of the era on Christmas Day, and by the end of January, the stars responsible had gone to the competition. Bill Cotton, who had championed them throughout their BBC years, heard the news while ill in Los Angeles. That 1977 broadcast has since entered British folklore as a particular kind of peak, a moment when the country still shared the same screen, the same evening, the same laughter. No programme since has come close to those figures. The conditions that produced them, 3 channels, no internet, no VHS, will never exist again. Fact 7. They left for the movies. The reason Morecambe and Wise left the BBC was not money. The offers from Thames Television and the BBC were, by most accounts, roughly comparable in financial terms. What Thames could offer that the BBC could not was the chance to make films. In the 1960s, Morecambe and Wise had made 3 feature films for the Rank organisation: The Intelligence Men, That Riviera Touch, and The Magnificent Two. None of them had been a particular success, but the ambition to work in cinema had never left them. The BBC at the time had no film production arm. Thames had Euston Films. The move did not produce the films they had hoped for. When they finally made Night Train to Murder in 1984, it was widely considered a disappointment. What the move did produce was a series of television shows that, without their BBC writer Eddie Braben and their BBC producer Ernest Maxin, neither of whom followed them to Thames, never quite recaptured the quality of the 1970s. The lesson their career illustrated has been observed by everyone who has written about them since. The particular combination of Morecambe, Wise, Braben, and Ammons was what made the shows exceptional. Remove any element of that combination, and something diminished. They left the BBC for the movies. They never quite got the movies, and they never quite got back what they had left behind. Fact 8. The lost episode found in an attic. The first series of the Morecambe and Wise show, broadcast in 1968, was largely wiped from the BBC archives. For many years, only fragments of it survived. The second series fared better, but significant portions of the early BBC run existed only as memories and descriptions. In 2020, a black and white copy of an episode from October 1970 was found in the attic of Eric Morecambe's widow, Joan. It had been sitting there, unknown and unwatched, for 50 years. The episode was restored and broadcast at Christmas 2021. The discovery was a reminder of how routinely the BBC erased its own history during the 1960s and 1970s, wiping tapes to save money and storage space, destroying irreplaceable recordings of programs that audiences had loved and that no one had thought to preserve. The episode found in Joan Morecambe's attic survived because someone had recorded it on film at home and kept it. Across the country, private collections in attics and garages hold the only surviving copies of television that the BBC considered disposable. The show that half the country watched together is, in parts, only recoverable from the homes of people who loved it enough to hold on to it. Fact 9. Eric's 3 heart attacks. Eric Morecambe had his first major heart attack in November 1968 at the age of 42, while returning to his hotel after a show at the Batley Variety Club. He was saved by a stranger who recognized he was in distress and drove him to hospital. The stranger asked for an autograph while Morecambe was on the trolley. Morecambe signed it, convinced it was the last autograph he would ever give. He gave up cigarettes and took up a pipe instead. He cut back on public commitments. He survived, returned, and with Eddie Braben produced the most celebrated decade of his career. His second heart attack came in March 1979 and required a bypass operation performed by cardiac surgeon Magdi Yacoub. He recovered again. His third came on 27 May 1984 at the Roses Theatre in Tewkesbury during a charity performance. He completed his set, took 6 curtain calls, walked into the wings, and collapsed. He died in the early hours of the following morning at Cheltenham General Hospital. He was 58. The performance he gave that night was, by every account from those who witnessed it, one of his finest. The audience responded with standing ovations. He had been aware of his heart's condition for 16 years, and he gave everything to that last audience. He was 58 years old, and he had been performing for 43 of those years. Fact 10. The name that came from home. Eric Morecambe was born John Eric Bartholomew in the Lancashire seaside town of Morecambe on 14th May 1926. When he began performing professionally, his mother Sadie, who had taken work as a waitress to fund his dancing lessons and who was his most consistent champion throughout his early career, felt that Bartholomew was too long to print in a readable size on theatre. Bills. He took the name of the town he came from. It was a practical decision made for typographical reasons. It produced one of the most famous surnames in British entertainment history and meant that the town of Morecambe in Lancashire, which had given him his first home, ended up giving him his public identity as well. When he became famous, the town did not hesitate to claim him. A statue of Eric Morecambe now stands on the promenade of his hometown, showing him in his familiar pose, glasses slightly askew, arms raised in a moment of comic triumph. It has become one of the most photographed pieces of public sculpture in Britain. Ernie Wise, born Ernest Wiseman in Leeds, was a year older and had been performing professionally since childhood. They met in 1939 when Eric auditioned for impresario Jack Hilton at the age of 13. By 1941, they were performing together. The partnership that began when two boys were sharing theatrical digs lasted 43 years and ended only when one of them ran out of time to keep going.